You're listening to EdTech Heroes, a podcast that looks at how teachers in today's classrooms can use technology to improve student learning. In each episode, a hero in the world of education will share their story and discuss how innovation can influence the minds of the next generation. Let's jump in.
Hey, y'all, and welcome to EdTech Heroes. I'm your host, Nef, and today's guest is John Sowash. John is an experienced educator and former school administrator with a master's in education. He's also the founder of the Google Certification Academy, the author of the Chromebook Classroom, and is the host of a fellow EdTech podcast called Chromebook Classroom Podcast. John, welcome to EdTech Heroes.
Nef, great to be here. Thank you for having me. It is nice to be on the other side of the mic. I get to talk and I don't have to worry about editing, publishing, writing the blog posts. So thank you.
Oh, man, that is a nice position to be in where you can just espouse your ideas and leave it at that.
Absolutely. I do enjoy the podcast. It's an interesting medium. It's, way different than YouTube videos, which are very polished. You get a lot more personality than just a blog post. So it's a very unique way of communicating and people seem to like it. Podcasts are a big deal today.
They absolutely are. And I love a podcast about just about anything. Of course, my EdTech podcast. I like a true crime podcast.
All right. Yep.
Tell me about RVing. Tell me about how to fix things. It is just a litany of podcasts out there where you can truly learn about anything, which is awesome.
It's true. And I like the long form. Most other things are relatively short, TikTok and Twitter and whatnot. But I have listened to 3-hour conversations with Elon Musk and, very, very in-depth sports podcasts and all the rest. So it allows us to get a little bit under the surface beyond just the sound bites and get into some real interesting conversations.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm excited to have a really interesting conversation today. And I feel like you have branded yourself as the Chromebook guy who knows a lot. For those of you who are actually watching this on video, John literally has a Chromebook in front of him. So that seems pretty on brand. So I am curious, what made you start down this path of really specializing in Chromebooks?
Yeah, a couple of things. The abbreviated story is when I started teaching, my school had very limited technology. Like a lot of people, we had a computer lab. You would do your computer thing once a semester or whatever. 3-4 years later, my school decided to hand every kid an iPad. And that was amazing and terrifying simultaneously because we went from barely having any technology to using it literally every day all the time. And we were like, what do we do with this? And so that was kind of situation number one. When you have technology in the classroom every single day and it is with the students, they carry it with them, you really have to figure out new ways to use it. And you use it very differently than if it's a special event. And so that's when I began my journey into EdTech. Be like, okay, what are practical everyday things that improve student instruction and learning that utilize technology? Along the way, we discovered that there were some challenges with iPads because my school was iPads with Google. And this was back, there was no Google Classroom. There was no Google Drive app at the time. It was just like docs and slides. And it was kind of a hot mess in terms of like, as a teacher, if I create a document and want to get it to 30 kids in my class, there wasn't a great way to do that. And so some of the challenges related to using iPads led me ultimately a few years later to look into the Chromebook and see that it kind of fixed a lot of the problems that I had teaching with iPads in my classroom. And that's when I made the jump and started using them and really saw attached keyboard, bigger screen, just more power, really helped what I wanted to do with the technology. Now, I'm not an anti-iPad person. They've come a long ways. A lot of the issues that I just outlined have been fixed as well. I've seen teachers use great things with iPads, great things with Chromebooks. Both are fine choices depending on what your goals are. But for me, I really like what Chromebooks offer.
Yeah, and let's dig into that a little bit. So you mentioned a couple of things that are very tangible. a larger screen, a keypad, or a keyboard, and also this increase in power that at least Chromebooks had back in the day in comparison to the iPads that you were using at that time.
Mhm.
So, all of those are kind of specs on a screen, right? But what does that actually allow teachers to do in terms of classroom outcomes? Why do we care if a device is more powerful than another or if students have access to a keyboard? What does that mean?
The specs and all the details really aren't that important to a classroom teacher. For me, one of the biggest things and why I like the laptop form factor is multitasking. I mean,
Hmm.
right now I've got one, two, six. I got 12 tabs open. I've got half dozen extensions. I've got a couple of Android apps. Like, we've got all these different things that I can quickly switch back and forth between. And so that's really helpful. If you have directions in Google Classroom and then your students need to open up a Google presentation, they can jump back and forth. They can be watching a
Mm,
video while they're typing their responses. The multitasking for me was a huge thing. And then just the attached keyboard, being able to type out a response. Again, I taught high school, so the kids
mm.
were typing proficiently at that point. We were doing a lot of science labs, so entering data in a spreadsheet, it just worked better in the laptop form factor.
Yeah, certainly. I feel like this idea of multitasking is so important, especially when we think about older kids. And the example that you just posited makes so much sense, right? I've got the directions. Maybe I have an instructional video that's coaching me through a task. And then I actually have an assignment that I am working through, and being able to seamlessly go back and forth between those tasks might actually be the difference between a student feeling like they're turning in their best work and a student feeling a little hamstringed or
Mhm.
frustrated as they're trying to complete a task. So that's a really, really cool thing to point out.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want I think I sometimes get mischaracterized because I do promote Chromebooks so much. When I
Mm,
promote the Chromebooks, I'm really not promoting Google as much as I am promoting the idea of the web as the most powerful learning platform of all time.
hmm,
And you can access the web through anything, whether it's a tablet or a phone or a Mac or a PC. Like, if you pick the web as your learning platform, you will not go wrong. That is the future. And I think pretty much everybody is coming to that conclusion. Everything is a web-based service now. Even the apps, without an internet connection, a lot of the apps don't even do anything. I love that Google identified that early on. They created a device that was designed to run on the internet. You don't have to download anything, you have to install anything, you don't have to pick anything from the App Store. You log in, you type in where you want to go, and it works. It eliminates all that extra fussing around that, teachers don't have time for and students, don't need to deal with either. So I'm a big believer in the internet as a learning tool more than anything.
That's a bold statement, but I think I'm okay with agreeing with it that the web is this incredibly powerful tool. Because even in the 30 seconds since you've said that, I think about the ways in which working online allows us to be better at collaborating, both in the classroom and
Mhm.
as professionals. It gives us access to all of this information on demand, and I think a lot on this podcast, I think back to the Casey Bella episode where she made a really big assertion that our goal as educators is really to prepare students for the world. And if we prepare them to be really good digital citizens who know how to effectively navigate the web, then I think that we've done a really, really good job. And we've given them the tools that they need to basically learn anything.
Yeah, and the web will continue to evolve over time. I mean, the web from dial-up internet to today to whatever the heck Mark Zuckerberg and the metaverse has got planned. I don't even pretend to understand all of that. It's going to change, but the ability to connect people, access information, like, that's a fundamental, foundation of whatever the next thing is. Probably when we're both old and retired, we'll let the next generation figure that out. Reading, writing, and math and all the related skills are always the foundation of education. What changes is the application of those skills. So
Hmm.
we don't, write on stone tablets anymore. That's not a skill that's very in demand. We don't necessarily write long essays in newspapers anymore. Instead, we communicate through YouTube, through TikTok, through Twitter and Instagram and all these new platforms. Now, again, reading, writing, math are still the foundation of those things, but the communication, the application of those skills will change. And so our job is to prepare students to communicate ideas in the language of their generation, which is
Hmm.
different from what our grandparents, our parents, and will be different for our kids and our grandkids as well. But reading, writing, math will still be an essential aspect of that.
I love that in terms of thinking about the language of their generation. And I think it also kind of puts this impetus on us as educators to understand what that language is. Because the language of my generation is going to be a lot different than the language of the generation of the students that I'm teaching, right? Even that analogy or that reference back to dial up internet, I can almost guarantee that if I drove across town and spoke to my 12-year-old niece, she would not know what the heck I was talking about if I said that my
Sure.
mom needed to hang up the phone so that I could get on the internet, right?
Yeah, or there's so many different relics, from the floppy disk and
Oh,
running out of space. Yeah, instant message. Just so many relics. This weekend was the Academy Awards, which I didn't watch, but viewership of the Academy Awards it's down. I mean, it's all time low.
mm,
And I don't know why that's a surprise because kids don't watch movies as much. The super fancy artsy movies. If they created a Academy Awards of YouTube videos, I
hmm.
guarantee you it would be the hottest thing ever. It would have more viewers than anything else on TV. And there's not really anything to complain about, or it's just that's how it works. I mean, radio used to be super hot, and then television came along, and then the internet came along, and it's just the natural progression of things. And how do we communicate in the mediums that are popular at the time?
Yeah, yeah, very true, very true. And that's indicative of every industry, right? Not just
Mhm.
teaching, not
Yeah.
just entertainment, but how do we evolve in order to fit this new generation? And I know that one of the things that you've talked about is around having this really tight ecosystem. And that is helpful in terms of being able to at least teach this new generation. And I've heard you say a little bit earlier in our conversation that we might want students to have extensions available, to have websites available and apps and all different types of things that they can access on a Chromebook or really any device. Can you talk about why integration is so important? Like, why does it matter that all of these things are Google or any other thing to make it easier for students to access?
Well, I mean, it's just very practical
Mm,
in some sense. I mean, I'm a technology person. I like tech. I find it entertaining and interesting, but I'm also just a very practical person. Look, I taught in the classroom. You got 30 kids in front of you and you're teaching a lesson. You've got that critical moment where it's either going to work or it's not going to work. And, it's got to perform. It's got to be simple. The directions have to be accurate. And so simplicity is essential. There's a lot of tools out there that look great and maybe even do great things, but if they're too complicated or the process of getting my students signed up for them and connected with them is too complex, it doesn't even matter. Like that process is too challenging. So, I like what Google's done with Chromebooks, the Chrome browser, Chrome extensions, Google accounts, that universal sign in. I mean, I'm
mhm.
to the point now, just as a person, if a service doesn't offer Google login, I don't do it because the last thing I need is another username and password to remember. I mean, that's just a very practical thing. So that's why I think the integration is important, just because teachers need simple tools and
Mm.
students don't need to be messing around with signing up and logging in and configuring and whatnot. They need to, focus on the learning goals and objectives. And, the extensions do that. I mean, it's one of the reasons I love Screencastify is it's super easy to sign in. It puts everything in my Google Drive account. I mean, other screencasting tools will save the video effectively. Like, I don't want it in another place because I'm already in Google Drive. All my other stuff is there. Like, I don't need another place to save all of my stuff. So I love the integration. It's just simple. From a privacy perspective, districts are becoming more and more concerned about data privacy and what data is being shared with whom. We already have agreements with Google. That's already, been signed and approved. And so if a tool integrates with Drive, again, it just makes my life easier. I don't have to go out and do the research, say, oh, is my district going to allow me to use this because the data is being saved over here, over there. That's just really annoying stuff for teacher staff to figure out.
Yeah, I really like that you brought up this annoyance factor, and I think that it affects folks kind of all the way down, right? So you talked about kind of something that might impact a director of technology listening who's like, yeah, I've had to go through 50 different privacy agreements this year alone in order to give my teachers and students access to real tools that can help in the classroom. But to your point, when those tools are integrated with one particular thing, then that makes that conversation a lot easier to have. For teachers, every new tool that they onboard into the classroom necessarily comes with this level of debt. They have to teach students how to use it. And if they don't have to have them create a new username and have them learn a new sign on procedure, that's time that they have to build relationships, to understand the language of that generation, and to really get deeper into the learning goals. And I think that to your point, students are also a part of this conversation, right? Like they probably want to have more deeper discussions and engage in learning without having to worry about all of these logistical hoops that they have to jump through. So if we think about this relatively small concept of integration, but then think about it in terms of the time that it saves us to have things integrated, it's really, really cool.
Yeah. I mean, students and teachers and just people in general all fall into one of three groups. I mean, I've seen this happen so many times. It's just standard. You have roughly 10 to 20% who hate technology and
Hmm.
they would just prefer not to do it at all. And it's not, you can't convince them. There's nothing you can fix. That's just, they're not that. I mean, I had kids in my own class who were like that. And that's just, you just understand it. And then you kind of have your middle group. This is usually 60-ish%, 60 to 70%, who, as long as you give them clear instructions, as long as it works, as long as it's not too frustrating, they're fine with it. It's like, just want to do my work and get it done and move on. And then you've got your 20% on the other end who love technology and they want to use a new tool every day and they're always finding the latest and the greatest things. And it doesn't really matter how many people you have or what age they are. They all kind of fall into those three sections. And you just have to be mindful of it, provide additional support to the ones who need it, more challenges to the ones who really enjoy it and are ready to go to the next step. And, the majority of people, as long as they are given the appropriate instructions and support, are totally fine and they'll figure it out.
Yeah, I'm with you there. So I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on folks who are probably in that 60 to 70% range who are down to use technology as long as they have appropriate instructions,
Yep.
they know its impact. So that probably also applies to teachers who are looking to implement technology in their classrooms. So I know that you talked a lot about those teachers using video instructions as a way to get their
Mhm.
foot in the door. And what tips do you have for those folks as they move from just using video instructions to more fully integrating technology in their classrooms?
You know, the teachers, I would say the vast majority of teachers, like I said, 67%, understand that technology is an important aspect of the classroom. They're not swinging too far to one end, whereas like, oh, technology is the greatest thing ever, but they're also, certainly not Luddites. They're not anti-technology. They're just like, okay, I'm willing to do whatever I have to do to, create a diverse and engaging learning environment.
Hmm.
For that group of teachers, a couple of general principles that I always say. We have more than enough tools at our disposal on a regular basis. There is absolutely no reason that they need to be constantly on the search for the next new thing. I mean, for me, I would say over the summer, this is the time you kind of pick your head up, you look around, what's new, what's exciting, what sounds like it might fit my classroom, dabble with it, maybe add a few new tools to your toolbox. But then once the school year starts, I'm head down and I'm teaching. I'm not looking to implement any new things, any new tools. The tools you have give you way more opportunity than you can possibly imagine. I mean, even just tools like Screencastify. There's like 8 million ways you can use Screencastify. There's no way you have tried all of those different options. And connect yourself with, people like myself, with the EdTech Hero podcast, who will do the research for you and say, here's something you might want to hear about. Like, you don't have to go out and be an EdTech expert. There's plenty of people who that's their full-time job. That's me. Listen to those people. Sounds good. Take a look at it. So everybody has way more than they can possibly handle already. There's so much there. Video is a great example. A simple video, I mean, you can even just use your webcam. There are so many different options for using those videos. During the pandemic, I think a lot of teachers were forced to use more video than they may have previously been comfortable or even considered using. But that's something that I think is valuable even in a post-pandemic classroom. I know that during the pandemic, I was recording a weekly overview. So every Monday, I would just post a quick 2-minute video, say, hey kids, this is what we're going to be doing this week, and quickly kind of tick off, what we're doing, what to expect. Hey, don't forget, you got a quiz on Friday, so make sure you're studying Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We're going to do a, group discussion on Thursday. Make sure you're available for our meet session. That's still something that I think is very valuable. You can still record a lesson or an overview like that, post it to Google Classroom or Schoology or Canvas or Seesaw, whatever LMS you use, and then just gives students an overview, gives parents access to see what's going on. Still, there are lots of absences due to quarantines and different circumstances. Subplans are probably the worst part of teaching, so it allows you to continue teaching even if you aren't in the building. It's way easier to record that short 5-minute video than try to type all those instructions out. So I mean, right there's like 3 different things that all you need is a webcam for, whether it's Screencastify, your phone, and there's way more than that to just related to video.
Yeah, certainly. So if we get down to brass tacks a little bit there, is there a certain number of tools that you might recommend that a beginner teacher has at the start of a school year?
No, I wouldn't say there's a number. I guess, there's several different categories, and you need at least 1 to 2 things in each category. So like everybody needs to pick a document editing suite. So you
Okay.
either need to pick, Google Drive or Microsoft Office or Apple iWork. Like everybody needs to pick one of those. And I mean, just there's like 12 different tools within that suite. You need to pick a tool for recording video, whether that's Screencastify or Flipgrid or something like that. Like you need one of those. Probably editing an image would be another, good one. Editing video, recording audio. So there's, I've got a list somewhere I can dig up, but there's, a bunch of categories that you need to have a solution in. And then I'll kind of rotate out what tool I'm using within those categories based on what's good, what I like, what I'm seeing that looks useful.
Okay, that makes sense. So, thinking in terms of categories or compartments of things that you
Mhm.
might need to do, and starting the year, or really starting your exploration into technology with an idea of what tool might be able to
Mhm.
solve those needs. So, we talked a little bit about these folks who are beginning their exploration of technology. And I think your advice there is very sage. Start small with a few different tools, 1 per category, and call that a day. But what about those
Mhm.
folks who maybe aren't quite ed tech experts, but know quite a bit about implementing technology, how do they level up their skills and become even more proficient and offer their students more opportunities?
Sure, there's always enhancements and improvements to any tool. I mean, even I can remember, with Screencastify, you initially just kind of start by recording your screen.
Mhm.
And then you're like, oh, wait, I can annotate my screen too. And then, oh, I can like zoom in on areas. And then I can add my webcam in there as well. So there's always kind of like these additional layers that you can add in once you're comfortable with the basics. And that's true whether it's Google Drive or Chrome extensions or Chromebooks or whatever it is. And I'd like to share a lot of those tips, through my social media channels and YouTube videos, like the hidden features, the did you all know that you could also do this? And so again, connecting yourself with people who are experts. You've had some great guests here on the show. I just listened to the Jake Miller episode. Jake's a great example. His edgy gifts are amazing. Lots of cool hidden features in there. Certainly Casey Bell has tons of advanced tips and tricks as well. So pick the person, and we all have different personalities. I mean, if you like Southern accents, I'm not going to be your guy. But if you like the Texan, y'alls, then Casey is probably going to be a great fit for you. If you like corny jokes, I'm not very good at that, but Jake Miller is amazing. He's always got a great joke and a great analogy. So, there's so many different personalities. Connect yourself to the person that, kind of fits your style, personality. You like how
Mhm.
they communicate, and they'll kind of introduce you to that second level, those hidden features and tiers, and you can explore more.
The hidden features are clutch. And what I love so much about that advice is we're not saying, hey, teachers, go pick up 50 more tools after you just become proficient at the first 50 or the first five or the first 10, but it is how do we dive deeper? I think that that is true of Screencastify, of course, but my mind almost goes to using Excel, which I feel like a lot of us have had some
Mhm.
experience using Excel. And maybe you start with
Yeah.
just throwing some things in the cells. And then you're like, wait, there are
Mhm.
formulas and pivot tables and all of these other cool things that I can do. And it almost becomes this place where no matter how much you know about Excel, or maybe Google Sheets is your jam, there is always more to learn and more to explore to get more efficient, to automate more. So thinking about that in terms of our teaching tool belt is also really cool, right? Like, how do we just become really, really good at a few things versus just okay at a lot of things?
I think that's great advice, and spreadsheets are a wonderful example. I mean, there's such a chasm of ability differences between, a beginner user and an expert at it. So, yeah, I love that. I'm a big fan of just in time learning, and I think that's one
Mm,
reason that YouTube is such a wonderful platform. I mean, I could sit here and rattle off, 25 amazing hidden features of Google Drive, and you would be like, so what? Like, you have no need for those features until you have a
sure.
need. And at that point, you are an open vessel ready to soak up that knowledge. And that's what I'm over at YouTube and typing, how do I, use a V lookup? It's like, I have no
Hmm.
idea, but now I need to figure that out. I never cared until whatever moment or incident happened that caused me to now I desire that knowledge. And so knowing where to go and where to look is great when you have those moments.
Oh man, I'm really glad that you brought that up because I think that that concept of just in time learning is so much the language of this generation. And honestly, it is how I am learning now too as I mature and become older. I think back to when I was in the classroom, I taught 11th graders, I taught English, and I used to teach this, right? And I would
Mhm.
whole group, these are all of the components of the essay and blank stares, of course, right? And then students would start to work independently and necessarily they would be on different parts of the essay at different times. So one student probably cares about a thesis statement and could not care less about how to craft a
Right.
conclusion because they're not there yet. But when we
Mhm.
think about technology, I think that it provides this opportunity for teachers to provide this just in time YouTube like experience that really allows for on demand learning. And Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's hard to get students to care about, writing an MLA citation or using, strong verbs until they realize, oh, yeah, I should probably do that.
Mhm.
Um, and that's one of the interesting things that technology offers. So, like through Google Classroom, I can send my students off and they can all be working independently. I can keep track and see what everybody's doing in real time. And I can notice, hey, I've got 4 kids who are working on citations right now. I'm going to pull them aside and let's do a little mini lesson on
Mhm.
citations while everybody, like, it gives you the ability to do that. Paper and pencil, well, I'm totally fine with it, make that type of a situation a lot more difficult. So technology has definitely given us more visibility into the learning process and allow us to step in for that just in time instruction.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's flip the script a little bit. We talked about how teachers are able to transform classrooms by implementing technology at their level, whether that is putting more things on Google Drive in Google Classroom or creating videos or any of those things. But if we think about our students as creators, how do we empower them to be able to create their own materials digitally?
Yeah. So I'm going to circle back to what we talked about right at the beginning. So
Hmm.
reading, writing, and math still form the foundation of the educational experience. Now,
Mhm.
that can mean a lot of things. I mean, math, you got to do your daily practice, you got to do your worksheets, you got to write, you got to do journals, you got to do essays. But whenever possible, teachers should seek out ways for students to communicate the reading, writing, and math assignments using modern methods. So let's take essays. I think essays are an easy example. To be quite frank, nobody sits around and reads essays anymore. I mean, this isn't, 1780. These aren't the Federalist Papers when people, publish these long essays. Like nobody does that. But what if, now again, students need to be able to write long, complex, persuasive essays and research paper. They need that skill. But the method by which we communicate that information has changed. So have your students do your writing assignment, but then have them read their essay and turn it into a podcast.
Mm.
It's the same work. We're just communicating it through a different medium. And you can do all kinds of fun things. You can add background music and sound effects, and you can make it a whole thing. They're still developing the essential skill of writing, but communicating the final form of that product in a modern method. And you could obviously do that very easily with video. You can do it with images. So for math, have them create an Instagram post or short 30-second TikTok style video that demonstrates the correct way to solve a particular
Mhm.
math problem. Again, they're learning the skills, they're doing their daily practice, but there is a modern application to how they share that knowledge that comes once they've mastered the skill.
Absolutely. I think there was a TikTok trend not too long ago of adults showing how they would conquer a long division problem or
Mhm.
multi-step multiplication. Honestly, part of what was funny was how much folks were struggling to kind of solve those math
Sure.
problems, but also a really cool way for students to be a part of something that is modern, that feels relevant, while also showcasing their learning. So I really like this idea of thinking about what are the core fundamental skills that we want students to prove that they have learned, and then what are the different ways by which we can have them actually do that? Whether that's video, whether that's podcasting, maybe they
Mhm.
come up with an interpretive dance. I don't know. That might be a bad idea, but we can throw them all out and decide what is actually going to make the most sense.
Yep, absolutely. And again, I don't want to mislead people. Like, I am not advocating that teachers go out and have all their kids create TikTok accounts or Snapchat
Mm-hmm.
accounts or whatever. I'm just saying, like, there's obviously something that TikTok has identified in the short 30-second video format. And so set a limit, just that you have to be able to explain this thing in 30 to 60 seconds. And there's lots of great templates out there. I've created a few. I know that Matt Miller has a great set of social media style templates so that students can create a TikTok video, an Instagram post, Facebook post without having to actually set that up and be on the platform, but it's the same format and it's a little bit safer. I don't want any principals getting people in trouble for sending 8-year-olds onto Instagram or something like that. There's lots of ways that you can learn the skills and apply the skills without being on the actual platforms.
Very important disclaimer. I appreciate you not wanting people coming after you for getting
Certainly
a
not.
quadrant of folks on TikTok. But yeah, I think that's 100% correct, right? Like, even if it is not the direct application of what we see in the real world, how might we be able to mimic those ideas is a really important question that we can ask ourselves as educators.
Yeah, it's an exciting time to be alive and to be in the classroom. Certainly lots to talk about and lots of applications to seek out. But again, it all comes back down to we want students to be effective communicators through written, spoken, and recorded word and speech. So that takes on a lot of forms.
For sure. So before we wrap up our discussion, we have a segment here, which happens to be my favorite segment, where we ask every single one of our heroes to share some tips or advice for teachers. And because you are our resident Chromebook expert, what are some of your favorite new extensions that teachers might be able to add to their tool belt this summer as they're researching?
Yeah, and again, summer's a great time to kind of pop your head up and look around and see what's available for sure. So my favorite new extension, if we're saying new, is something called Screen Pal. And this is a Chrome extension. Nev, are you familiar with Moat? Has
I
anybody talked about
am.
Moat so Moat is cool. It allows you to basically record a video, an audio clip inside of anything. Well,
Mhm.
ScreenPal is the same thing for video. So it works exactly like Moat. You install the extension and then any text field that you see, whether it's email, Google Classroom, Google Forms, a comment box in Google Docs, tiny little video button appears. You can record a video or screencast, and then it drops the video right into that text field, just like Moat. So if speaking isn't enough, if you need to show an illustration, then ScreenPal is a cool one for visual learners.
Yeah, I like it. It seems like it would be a great tool for feedback, a great opportunity
Mhm.
to explain things. I'm thinking about receiving an email where I'm about to type a novel in response and instead
Correct.
being able to hit a quick video and explaining my thoughts or response that way. So, Screen Pow is the
ScreenPal.
recommendation.
Yeah.
All right. So, one final question. So, you talked a lot about online resources that teachers may be able to tap into so that they can get the research curated for them versus having to do that entirely independently. And you've already mentioned some awesome content creators, but can you just kind of put a bow on that and tell us what your favorite online resources are?
Well, I am the Chromebook guy, so a lot of what I spend my time reading and researching surrounds Chromebooks and the
Hmm.
development of the Chrome platform. So I read Chrome Unboxed every day. They're a great group of guys. They blog extensively about all the updates and things for Chromebooks. So that's what I read. That in addition to every single Google product blog. So I have them all in my RSS reader because Google, I mean, there's so many updates every day. They probably have 4 to 5 updates. Now, look, a lot of them, probably 90% of those updates are either very technical and really don't need a lot of thought by classroom teachers. And so I'm trying to do the work, read through all of that, and then kind of say, okay, this one is worth knowing about. I mean, then I'll share that through Twitter and Instagram and
Hmm.
Facebook and the rest. So Chrome Unboxed does that for me because they go deep. They like dive into the source code and stuff that I didn't even understand. And then they say, here's some interesting things. And then I say, okay, which of these things are going to be interesting for teachers? and then I'll
Mhm.
share those out. So we'll filter out the stuff that is relevant for the classroom teacher.
All right, very cool. So it sounds like, especially if you are interested in learning a little bit more about Chromebooks and Google updates in general, then John is recommending himself. He's the person who's going to distill it down and tell you what is actually helpful for your classroom.
There's a lot of noise out there. And look, teachers have a hard job. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that they have to figure out on their own. So, yeah, I'll do my best to give them what they need.
Absolutely. There is a whole heck of a lot out there. So it is helpful to have that distilled down to the most important information. John, I so appreciate you joining EdTech Heroes. And listeners, be sure to follow John on Twitter at JR Sowash and listen to the Chromebook Classroom podcast. I am your host, Nef Dukes, and I'm looking forward to seeing y'all next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of EdTech Heroes, presented by Screencastify.